This is Godly Talks and Devil's Advocates, where we discuss God-centered topics in our pursuit of truth, and most of all to answer, who really hardened Pharaoh's heart?
All right, shall we?
Yeah. Am I gonna just totally ruin it when I cough? Because they're gonna do a cough.
No, you're fine. I had a bit of a cough.
He's good. I probably won't.
Makes it sound like we're real.
Yeah.
That's good. So are we recording?
I didn't know if those guys are real, but then they started
Alright,
talking.
so I will start with what I was going to say to David when we were just discussing briefly about this topic. And so really all I wanted to do was just say that, obviously this is a group that is for discussing things, but the reason I want to provide this context is that in order to just say that the reason that we're discussing this topic, among other topics, is that, and why this matters, because I think to some extent we've all had conclusions on this already, and we've been able to move on. But the reason this matters, and this is probably very obvious, and maybe this is what Doug was going to say in his intro anyway, but this matters because it changes people's lives, like when they pick the wrong way on something like this. Like, if they decide that evolution is the only story, or naturalism is the only story, and they decide that God didn't create the world, that's like it for them, and they kind of shortcut the path pretty early. Where is it, if they can hang in there, and if they're willing to, look into it a little further, even if the evidence isn't like all compelling on one side, even if it's more like, oh, that one's a little bit more that way, and that piece of evidence is a little more that way, if they can hang in there a little bit longer, then they might, make a different decision. So I guess that's the context, is why we go through something like this and study it.
Yeah, that's a good intro. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Did you have that prepared?
I was just thinking on the drive over.
Okay, so I made a...
Can I rebuttal that?
Go ahead.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, I understand if we have other people listening to this, and by no means am I against this topic whatsoever, but what does it do for people that aren't Christians and stuff like that? Like, I understand how a possibility of a talk like this might bring them closer, or people that have just now turned and are struggling with crossing over or whatever. But what does it do for us? I mean, besides actually getting here and having a conversation and exchanging ideas or whatever, I mean, none of us actually know what happened. So this is all just hypothetical theories on our part.
Yes, but no. I don't know if you looked at the outline.
Kind of,
but it goes into more than just the Big Bang. So it's more than just the initial creation of the universe. And having read the book, so I'll tell you, I took a shortcut, and I read the book, Lee Strogel's Case for a Creator, where he goes and interviews a whole bunch of leading scientists and all this other stuff, and collects all this data to look at it. He's a lawyer or an attorney or whatever, and that's his shtick, is that he goes through and systematically tries to find evidence to prove or disprove different claims within Christianity. So the point here was the case for a creator as far as the universe. Having just finished this book today, because I was sick over the weekend, I was going to finish it then. It has, for me specifically, it's solidified a lot of my viewpoint. And I've studied a lot of this throughout my scientific training, so I already kind of gone down the paths, I just hadn't sent it all the way home. What I think people with non-scientific, Christians specifically with non-scientific background, would gain from this is a lot. Because just constantly throughout this entire book, every single one of these things pointed back to God. And so, the ability to have science not refute, but support, and actually direct you to faith, to Christianity specifically, I think is a really powerful thing, because it's taking these people who insist on finding naturalistic explanations to everything in the world, in the universe, purely naturalistic, and it's turning it on its head, because ultimately it comes back to a point where nothing within our laws can explain that. And they just throw up their hands and they say, all right, nothing can explain that.
Well, and I think even further, like, to back up, like, I think all of that is true, but to back up even further from that, like all of the philosophical reasons for doing this, like, I mean, let's face it, like, this is pretty unpopular. Like, I mean, if you were to bring this up at work, like, people would just, like, kind of laugh you all over the place. So, This is a huge barrier for people. And as a Christian, like, I would say, if you haven't struggled with this before, it's only just because you haven't, like, you've been fortunate enough not to have to look into it. Like, or nobody's hit you with the right question at the right time, or, like, challenged you enough, or, you know what I mean? Like, it's just, you're either, if you haven't ever struggled with it, then you're fortunate because you're going to at some point in your life, and if you aren't prepared, then it can really throw you for a loop. And for the rest of us who maybe, and even if maybe you never go through that struggle personally, like, you're going to have loads of, like, every person you meet is going to pretty much think that your worldview is archaic and ridiculous. And if you're not prepared to give an answer, then I don't know. It's not very good, right? So.
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways, I'm still dealing with this because I was raised in a very, like, the Bible is literal worldview. I was obviously homeschooled for 8 years. And so at some point when I came to believe that the earth isn't 10,000 years old, or at least if it is 10,000 years old, then it's really bizarre that it was created to appear much older than that. It threw me for a huge loop, because all of a sudden that meant that Genesis isn't literal, which meant that not everything in the Bible is literal. In fact, right off the bat, it's not. And in a lot of ways, I'm still dealing with that, because it's like, yeah, I mean, that just, it's always been, it's hard to be raised and always have it presented like, no, it's a literal 7 days, the earth is 10,000 years old, and then when you're 25, 26, just realize that you have a really hard time believing that. Because that feels like, it removes a big pillar of something you've always believed. Yep. So this is something that's always been hard for me, or ever since that point.
But that was a good question for our intro. Way to beg the question.
Started it out well. So the one thing that the book doesn't discuss is the notion of, what's it called, New Earth, where, like you just mentioned, where God created everything to look older than it actually is. Because there is no, I mean, that just is, you either believe that or you don't. There's no way.
Basically, it takes science and, like, throws it out right away.
Yeah, you just ignore science, essentially. Which is perfectly fine if that's what you want to do. It's a matter of faith. I am a scientist, and so I have no reason to believe that the physical laws that govern the entire universe have changed over the course of time from its beginning. And just a logical argument that I can't get over is, they say 7 days in Genesis, but if he created everything before that, there wouldn't have been this notion of a day. Right? I mean,
What do you mean if he created everything before that?
like in the first day, there was no sun and earth, there was no 24-hour period. So, like,
Well, day one was light.
Okay.
Light and dark.
Right.
So I would assume that would be the start of day one.
Yeah. Anyway, we're not going to get into the old Earth thing, because there's just no systematic, pragmatic way that you can actually go through that. There's no biblical evidence, in my opinion, that supports that God created everything with fossils in it. So we're just focusing on assuming it's old Earth, that sort of
clear? Did I make myself clear?
I'm clear. I wonder... Huh?
You've read the book, right?
Yeah. I'm clear. I wonder if...
If you ask Tim, has he read the book? 9 times out of 10, it's yeah, of course.
He said it's been a while.
It has been a while. I mean, I'm clear, but I wonder if... I mean, do we need... Maybe we just need to move on just for the sake of you getting through the material, but is it fair for David or for our viewers at home for us to make that leap in an assumption? Like, is that reasonable?
Maybe we can do a different. Maybe I can do a topic on literalism, and that can be like the focal point. But David obviously did a lot of prep for this. I don't want to derail it.
Doug did.
Yeah, sorry, Tom.
All right.
No, I mean,
I don't know.
So let's go forward. Let's
no, I mean the point is he doesn't even attempt to address it in the book in the majority of my arguments,
which is interesting, actually. I mean,
it is.
That's an interesting omission, right?
Right.
Okay. Let's
So is
proceed.
he just? I haven't read the book.
Right.
So does he automatically just dive into? It's already over 10,000 years old. We're not even going to discuss that because there's no way.
No, he actually started out with, I believe in evolution. Macroevolution.
Yeah.
Prove me wrong. And then he just gets blown out of the water.
With the assumption of macroevolution and a billion
And
year old.
Those two go hand in hand.
Right.
Yeah.
And then it just gets dismantled. Like in the most satisfying way. Coming from somebody who's been... Anyway. Okay, so I'll just start plowing through this. I'll probably try and go a couple of sections and then stop for questions.
Great.
Depending on the time that it takes. I gave you pens to write so that I can try and get through the whole section. It's going to be pretty quick, actually, I think. So there's a lot of, just kind of a precursor to all of this stuff, there's a lot of testimony, data at certain points, studies at certain points, facts that back up the majority of this. It's all in the book, and to recreate it would be exhaustive and pointless. So I'm taking this distillation from his distillation from raw material. That's basically the only way I could have gotten this amount of information. So we could dig deeper on something if we just really disagree, but that's the disclaimer.
Did we say what book?
Yes, Case for a Creatively Struggle.
And did we say what the topic is?
I guess the cosmology would be the topic. The beginning of the universe. Basically, like naturalism versus a creationist view. So, is there a God? Is there a divine presence out there, or are we a series of things? Are we just existing in this physical universe? That's kind of the background. Okay, so this was just an interesting quote to define truth, because ultimately that's what we're searching for, and that if you really get philosophical, there's not tons of ways. In fact, I don't think there is a single way to definitively 100% prove anything ever. It's always reliant upon some sense or something else. And so that is important here, because what we're doing is just essentially, like the book says, you're building this case where you amass this evidence and then you evaluate it and you make your determinations of what you believe in based on that evidence. So the Hebrew word suggests that truth is something which can be relied upon. It's more than just being right. It's about trustworthiness. So in scientific terms, it means if I believe that that cup is on that table, I could do a whole bunch of experiments, which if that cup is on that table, it would react this way or that way. And then assuming that those all agree, then I can put my trust in believing that that cup is there, like actually there.
Is it fair to say that scientifically, I don't have a scientific background, but something can be disproven but not proven, right? Isn't that accurate?
Yeah, basically. So the argument is kind of laid out as such. It kind of begins. The book jumps around, but I'll begin here. That basically talking about the universe itself as a totality, regardless of anything else. We have to think of the universe as having a beginning. There's a lot of philosophical things out there that, and I'm drawing a blank on which ones, but they actually previously believed in eternal universe. So the universe always existed previously and will always exist in the future. And all the physicists, mathematicians, etc., Einstein, Hawking, they all have basically conceded the point that it cannot be eternal. Because...
Although Hawking tried to introduce something pretty recently. Yeah. But everybody didn't buy it, nobody bought it.
Yeah, because he used imaginary numbers.
Right.
And then Einstein...
And it almost seemed like he had like a vendetta. It was like...
Yeah.
Basically made up math.
Yep.
Yeah.
So basically there's this notion that everything has to have a beginning. And then furthermore, everything must have a cause. Because we cannot cause itself. Yeah. Elephants cannot pop into existence just because in that corner. Like, we have no evidence of that. That just doesn't happen. Things cannot cause themselves. We didn't make ourselves be born. So therefore, something outside must have caused it. There must be a causative agent. When we're talking about the universe itself, that means that something outside of the physical realm must have caused it. That is not bound by the physical self.
I think about the whole all things have a beginning, one thing that always made a lot of sense to me was that in order for there to be an eternity behind us, we would have had to cross an eternity.
Mm-hmm.
You know, which you can't really do that.
To get to that moment.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You know?
And that was one of the arguments, too, was that it just breaks down. And mathematically speaking, you can't do it. Everything would just break down.
But on the quantum level, I mean, aren't there things that don't appear to have a cause? Like when you have, quantum entanglement, and you've got one thing that moves, and over here, no matter how far away it is, it also pops into position. I mean, there's a lot of things that just appear to...
There is, but we also haven't measured on every plane, if you will. Like, there's a whole bunch going on that we don't know about. Like, we just now discovered gravitational waves as of last week.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there is tons of stuff going on at the quantum level that we just haven't figured out yet. But yeah, that's a valid.
And quantum mechanics is really interesting because by the very nature of I'm not extremely knowledgeable in this area, but there's something to the fact that just by the nature of measuring it, you ruin whatever's going on.
Yeah.
With quantum mechanics.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the whole
thing about entanglement.
Right.
Is as soon as you observe wherever this one is, then that one becomes defined.
Right.
It's very weird.
Yeah.
But you're right. I mean, outside of the quantum level, we haven't found anything that doesn't have a cause.
Right.
Yeah. At this point, I think the assumption would be that they don't have a cause only because we haven't found it yet.
Well, but even still, in quantum entanglement, they have two particles together and then separate them that distance. We cause them to be separated, and then when you move this one also moves. So we don't know why. They're still connected behind the scenes in the space-time continuum.
Yeah.
But there's still a cause that we caused them to be separated. We caused this one to move.
That's true.
So it's not that we don't know necessarily why, but that's not what the claim is. The claim is that if I just have that cup, there's not a cup that's going to spontaneously appear in China that's going to move when I move that one.
Yeah.
Maybe. Fingers crossed. Okay, so this kind of leads up to the Big Bang, right? So they define this notion of scientific versus personal explanations, and I thought this was really interesting. It doesn't really come into play too much here, but it's really fascinating to think about because it just is. So, for instance, they pose this hypothetical question. You walk into a room, you see a kettle boiling on the stove, and you ask, why is that kettle boiling? And the scientific explanation says it's kinetic energy from the flame. It's coming up, heating the water, boiling it. That's why the water is boiling. The personal explanation is, I want some freaking tea. Right? So, like, there's kind of the how versus the why, if you will.
Meaning that the universe... Like, is there a metaphor there that's important or not really?
Yeah,
Maybe.
so going back to the Big Bang, well, okay, so the next bullet is the point of that. There cannot be a scientific explanation for the first state of the universe because there's no earlier initial conditions. The natural laws hadn't been created. So when the Big Bang was just a marble, there was nothing. So you cannot describe that marble as with your rules because the rules weren't in existence yet. So therefore, it must be a personal explanation. It must be something that goes beyond the scientific description of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does actually.
I think it's a really good metaphor. I don't know if it's necessarily like completely logically sound, like therefore it must be a personal explanation, but I think the metaphor is really solid.
Well, I mean, the personal explanation just means it's not scientific. So it's a scientific.
Right.
You can.
I mean, that's
explain
kind of like the assumption there is it's just an assumption that not everyone would make. That's all. Like we're assuming that the universe has a reason for existing, basically.
Right.
Like we're assuming walking into the room that the kettle has a reason for being turned on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, it just requires a little bit of. No, it requires a little bit of faith to make
It does.
Sure. Which always will, right? I mean, you're never gonna. But the atheists will just say that, 200 years ago, we thought that, there was just our Earth and not much outside of it. Now we realize that we're just back inside of thousands of known galaxies and trillions of light years across. So, if I was an atheist today and I didn't want to believe, I would just say, well, probably there are universes above and below us, which if we would understand that, we would understand the cause of the universe, blah, 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 blah. So they would just say that our scope of vision isn't big enough yet.
There's two things to that.
I think that's fine though. That just pushes the problem back. Like,
Right.
yeah.
If there's another universe, another dimension, you just move back a level. There still has to be a cause to what's creating these universes.
Yeah.
And so,
I agree.
Or you're saying just that.
I'm just saying
the other argument is just that. Well, like the universe is so big that it's basically just there's aliens all over the place, and this is just one of the random worlds that happen to have people.
No, I think the atheists would say that, we've always, every time we've pushed the envelope back, we've just found natural causes. We've been pushing the envelope back since we were living in the woods. And we've come so far, why would I stop now and make the giant leap to God?
because
You
so they address that.
Yeah.
Atheists cannot answer that final question.
Which one?
The Big Bang.
Yeah.
They can't answer it. They can't, because their notion that it doesn't matter and that we weren't created for a purpose is that nothing, essentially, that we were created from nothing. If there was no God, we were created from nothing for no reason. And therefore we wouldn't have been created. Like, there's just no... They still can't explain how do we exist then. They still can't come up with anything of what actually caused all of that
Yeah.
and what created it.
Not so much more the step-by-step of evolution, but the initial causation agent.
The creation, yeah. The initial creation.
The initial bang.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Big Bang.
And that's why people make up imaginary numbers to try and fudge it. People try and skip over it by creating constants that make you not have to worry about it. So when Einstein realized by calculation that the universe was expanding, therefore that meant that it eventually came back to a single point at a single point in time previously. And therefore there must have been this Big Bang.
Yeah.
And so he, instead of having to deal with that, he created a constant so that he could just assume that the universe was at a solid, like, at a constant state. He just created a constant to get rid of it.
Cool.
So,
But pretty much, like, I mean, people just came back and basically redid his work and reproved that the universe is expanding.
yeah.
Right.
Well, he acknowledged it. I mean, he acknowledged it. So it wasn't like he tried to cover it up. It just was troubling because what that always points back to is this initial Big Bang that no scientific, no naturalistic viewpoint can prove.
Yeah.
Because there is nothing in our world, in our universe, that can explain the Big Bang. It has to be outside. And that's the whole point of this whole section. The next bullet says, the cause must be a personal agent who has freedom of will to create without any previous determining conditions. He could decide to say, let there be light, and the universe will spring into existence. And according to the Bible, that's what happened. I already said this point about the universe expanding, and then they traced it back to the Big Bang.
So how do they, and maybe you don't know this and it's okay, but how do they know the universe is expanding?
Oh, I think they mentioned it in there, but
It's by measuring the light, isn't it?
yeah, you can.
Measuring light from stars.
So the light from faraway galaxies has a slight red hue, and similar to like when a car drives by and you hear like
Distortion, or
their horn and it goes like that. It gets higher and then lower pitch. Light does the same thing as it's traveling away from you, and it's red, which is why, like, I think, I might be wrong on this, but I think as the sun's setting, that's why the sky gets kind of red. It's because
I think that's dust in the
it's dust in
atmosphere.
there. Well, yeah, I know, but like, I think it's
I think it's because it's going through a lot of dust. Because it's not coming down on you, but going horizontally.
does it do that? There's something that we observe where it shows that. I can't remember what it is. It might not be the sun.
Alright, no, that's good. That helps though.
But the point is that that's how they measure the universe expanding, is because all of these have a slight red hue.
Yeah. And
Well,
also,
that's one of the things that makes. I mean, that's one of those measures of time that makes a young universe difficult to believe in.
Exactly. There's a lot of stuff like that.
It's just one of them. There's ones that are even more straightforward, actually, because this one's fairly complex, but there's ones that are even simpler. This one is basically like, they can tell from the light, you know, how far away it is, and so you're getting light that's, you know, like 1 billion years old, like appearing on Earth. That had to have left wherever it's, you know, started from. Millions of years ago, billions of years ago, pick a number. So.
Okay. Any other on those first two sections?
It's just so typical, you know, that every time there's like something that's like, oh, this totally points to God, it comes with this other edge to the sword that's like, but this totally takes out like a very straightforward reading of the Bible, you know? It's like so crazy how...
But what does that take out? Other than the 7 days. If we
Well, the
just
Genesis
table
too.
the 7 days.
And also the genealogies. So-and-so gave birth to so-and-so. Like in the first
I don't think it messes up the genealogies.
It never
Sure
says
it
when
does.
those start.
No, it doesn't. Why?
I'm pretty sure because isn't the first in the Matthew, doesn't it start at Adam and go all the way to Jesus? I'm pretty sure it does.
So what? What's wrong with that?
Well, I mean, you've only got like, I don't know, 80 odd generations or something.
That doesn't mean anything. Like, having the Earth that old doesn't necessarily... Like, it's way easier to prove that the Earth is old than it is to prove that humans are old.
Yeah, that's true.
Like, nothing's, like, to me, I mean, and I've
So you would say old Earth, young but humans not very old.
I would, but I don't know. I mean, I'm not necessarily that everyone agrees with that, or that Doug does, or...
I would say I have a weird viewpoint of it.
Yeah.
In that I think it's old Earth, I think it's old creatures, and I think that once our story begins with Adam and Eve, that's when it begins in the Bible, and that it's God's intervention to take us from like Neanderthals to human.
Okay.
That it's Him intervening just like He does throughout numerous periods that are documented.
I mean, I don't, but I won't
Are you
read
fact checking?
I just found an interesting article online that says the universe is not expanding after all. Controversial study suggests.
Suggests.
Is it on, like, what's the website?
SciNews.com.
SciNews.com.
Yeah, I think I would just go back, like, as far as what... Doug knows more about it than I do, so this is his study, so I'm curious to see what he says of the rest of the study. But I would just say that, like, it seems way more compelling to me that creatures are very old rather than... I have a hard time with the modified human beings for several reasons, not only scientific, but also philosophical reasons. Like,
What do you mean modified human beings?
like pre-human beings, basically. Like Neanderthals.
Like Neanderthals?
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Why?
I don't know. I think that part of Scripture isn't really important to me, maybe. Like, that God created man and woman in His image. And, like, just that literal part of Scripture, like, I do actually believe in literally. Like, which is weird, maybe. And maybe it's counterintuitive to, like, how easily I don't believe in other things being literal. But, like, to me, I guess I don't trust the fossil record, like, when it comes to that stuff. I mean, like, it seems pretty solid to me on other things, like, it seems solid to me on certain carbon dating things, and, like, I trust that the dinosaurs are, like, pretty old, but, like, I haven't seen very many compelling, like, human fossils that haven't been pretty well refuted in one way or another.
No, you're right. Like, the first chapters of this go through basically dismantling all of that stuff for human evolution.
Right.
And that's not what I'm talking. So, like, the missing link that they found back in the 40s or the 60s or whatever it was, it has a name like Molly or Susie or something.
Right.
It was just a jaw and part of a femur.
Right.
They filled in the rest.
Right. There's been ones that were like a tooth. I mean, it's pretty outrageous.
So, they've basically disproven a lot of that stuff.
So you may have reasons that are like more like DNA focused or biology focused. And I don't know enough about that to know. So.
No, I mean, I guess my point is, so we'll kind of discuss it more when we get down to the Cambrian explosion.
Okay.
I'll just keep going for now and get to this final part about the universe. So, there's an exhaustive portion where he goes through this person he's interviewing just starts going through all the different factors in physics in our universe that are so fine-tuned that it's preposterous, that are necessary for life. So, like, if it were any more or any less, like, matter wouldn't hold together, or it would hold together too much that it wouldn't be able to actually do anything. Orbits would be jacked up and just spin all over the place. I don't know. It was like all the stuff that you could think of would just not work. It wouldn't be suitable for life. And it's within a incredibly narrow margin. If I'm not mixing up the probability thing, they were like, if you add up all of these factors of what it took, including some of the ones I haven't gotten to yet, but if you add all these things up of what it takes for us to have life, it's like having to throw a bullseye at something that's like 1
trillionth of an inch big, but you're a trillion miles away in space. You have to hit a bullseye. And so it's like basically possible. Which is just crazy, like, because I naturally resist that. I'm like, no, I mean, if you were to change it, like, life would still emerge, it would just be different. But when you start talking about gravity itself and the interactions of the chemical bonds down at the molecular level, like, if those get messed up, it just wouldn't work. And that
is interesting because
sorry.
Sorry.
I was just going to say, that since the podcast is called Devil's Advocates, I'll just say that they always say that, yeah, you're right, it is ridiculously fine-tuned, but it's also like a self-selecting mechanism where you've got that many galaxies, that many billions of planets, and that much raw space, then of course it's going to self-select for that one area where all those conditions are met, and if you've got that many different possibilities, then at least one of them is going to make it. So I guess to your analogy, yeah, it's a really small bullseye over a really small distance, but we're throwing a trillion times or whatever, you know?
Yeah. So that being the case, first of all, if you mess with like Van der Waals forces, if you make those too strong, it doesn't matter where you are. Like, that's down at the molecular level. That's not Earth's gravitational field or a star's gravity. I mean, that's physics, and that's ubiquitous.
Yeah, I mean, so I think it's probably important to distinguish between like things which are operable, and that obviously, you know, fish are able to live in the water. We have to live on the air. Like, those are operable things. But I think the things that you're talking about are things that you never hear about because people always just talk about like, oh yeah, under some circumstances there's going to be some sort of weird creatures that could somehow emerge.
Right.
But yeah, you never think about like, oh, if gravity's just like a little bit stronger, then basically nobody lives because everything's just too heavy.
Yeah. But it's more than that. It's like if intercellular attractions are too strong, everything conglomerates together, and we just don't have the chemical reactions. They can't. The atoms can't break apart and reorganize and all this other stuff. So, like, when stars are becoming supernovas, the hydrogen turns into helium, turns into heavier metals, and it just goes and goes and goes. And that's how we get more core elements. And those things wouldn't necessarily happen, at least not as easily, and we may not have the different variety. The chemical reactions wouldn't work the way that they do, if at all. I mean, it's kind of hard to theorize on it.
I get what you're saying.
But it's more than just like gravity. It's all the way down to the molecular level. It's what they went through.
I guess I was just speaking to these points, because these points are all about our location in the universe.
Yeah, but, I mean, when you really take them all together, it is a lot more... Because I was with you, like, legitimately, before reading this book, I was like, I'm sure there's life somewhere else.
Yeah.
Like, come on.
Yeah.
There's gotta be something else. Even if it's not sentient, like, there's probably something else out there. But then, like, when they started going through this junk, like, we take a lot of stuff for granted. So, we're in the right spot in the galaxy. So we're far from the star formations, which is where all the supernova explode. Because that would obviously take us out. We're far from the center of our galaxy, which is where the black hole is, and every time the black hole sucks at its stuff, it releases bursts of energy, gamma rays, X-rays, radiation, so a higher concentration of supernova.
Do we know that our galaxy has a black hole in the center?
Yes.
Supermassive black hole is the word for it.
Yep. Mu's made it.
And we know that because it spins around it, or?
Yeah, it's all like circling that drain.
So we'll
And they've measured it. They've measured like stuff radiating from it, I think.
It's a pretty sweet concept. Like, just the idea of, like, a black hole big enough to keep the whole galaxy anchored to it. It's nuts.
It's insane.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's like the size of a star, but it's a black hole, you know? So.
And so they're saying that because of that, our galaxy is in a really narrow disk, and so it makes the sun's orbit circular, which keeps us in a stable spot in the arm of the spiral arm that we're in. And then furthermore, the closer you get, because those stars are exploding in junk, they're converting the helium and the hydrogen to heavier metals. So the closer you get to the core, the more of those heavier metal elements you will have. The further out you go, the more it's just hydrogen and helium. So we kind of need to live in the sweet spot because we need all of those things. But we don't want to be by the explosions, and we don't want to be starved of all the essential stuff on the outside. So we're like right in the middle of that, which is perfect. And then when you start going and zooming into our little orbit, or our solar system, Jupiter, because it's so giant, along with Uranus and Neptune, all like absorb a whole bunch of, and Mars, absorb a whole bunch of like comets and whatever they're called, asteroids.
Yeah.
They just take the blow, specifically Jupiter because it's giant, so the gravitational pull sucks it all in. It's in such an orbit that it allows it to do that. If it wasn't in that orbit, it wouldn't do that. We would get hit a lot more. We are in a nearly circular orbit, which means that water stays water, liquid water, on our surface always. Furthermore, the moon basically is a counterweight that keeps our axis at a certain tilt that varies within like 0.1% or something. Whereas without the moon, it would vary all over the place, and we'd be spinning like in circles, and therefore,
So the seasons would change so much we could never.
yeah, like there would be no North Pole, South Pole.
Right.
Places would just be frozen. Different places would be frozen. Like
And then we go to a desert and everything would die, basically. Like,
right.
At some
So
point.
it just wouldn't work for life.
Okay.
And so that keeps us going. We're obviously the right distance so that we have liquid water. Oh yeah, and then the moon also orbiting us does the tides, which circulates all the heat and the nutrients and the salt in the oceans, which allows for life, which also allows for the weather, which allows for all the other stuff. Basically, all the ecosystems here on Earth require that sort of stuff to function. Oh. Was that you, Nathan?
You didn't away from her?
Yeah. Okay. Is there any questions on that? I had no idea with our orbit. I didn't even take that into consideration. Thinking of like stuff hitting us, I didn't take that into consideration. One of the things that is mentioned in the book that I didn't put in here is that one of the beautiful things is that our Earth is set in such a nice place in our solar system and in our galaxy, plus with our atmosphere, that it was almost like we were, like God's begging us to observe. And so, because, if our atmosphere, if the concoction of it was different, it may be like fully cloudy all the time, or harder to see, but really it's perfect.
So I find all of these arguments extremely compelling. I think back to what Matt said earlier, and this is, just because I'm interested in what you guys would say about this, is like very much along the lines of what you said. I feel like when I've read, debates about this topic, like when creationists bring up this sort of point, like agnostics or atheists or evolutionists will always just be like, yeah, basically you're just telling me that like I'm special, and so that means that we're special. Or like, it's like, because we're here, we can observe it, and so they're basically like discount every one of these factors. And philosophically, I don't know how to deal with that because it's like basically like we're telling you the odds of this are really slim, and it's like, yeah, I already know that, but so what? I don't care. Like the very fact that I'm here, proves that the odds aren't that slim. Or it's like a ridiculous argument, but it somehow works. I don't know. I'm just curious what you would.
I mean, they're just dodging the question. They're not actually answering it. They're not refuting it. They're not rebutting it. They're just saying, well,
they're like basically saying you're not even allowed to ask the question.
Yeah, well, I think they're also saying that this is specifically to those galactic stuff, about like all the locations and everything. I think they're specifically saying that, well, we know there's thousands of galaxies, and every galaxy has hundreds of thousands of stars, potentially, millions of billions of planets. So you're bound to have one somewhere that meets all those boxes.
They've done
and that's logically, and we're that one. That's what they're kind of saying.
Yeah. They've done the probability once you account for all of these things, and it's way less than the other calculations. It's like 1 in trillion, 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 trillion something.
Yeah.
I mean,
I guess it just depends on how many universes there are.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll just keep going. I'm going along. So the Cambrian explosion was basically the biggest blow to evolution, period. Darwin himself said, he can't explain it. Not a single evolutionist, Darwinist can explain it. It just spits in the face of all macroevolution. Approximately 542 million years ago, basically all of the major phylum came to be. So I pulled this, I believe, from Wikipedia, just to try and get another quote. But prior to the Cambrian explosion, most organisms were simple, composed of individual cells, occasionally organized into colonies. Over the following 70 to 80 million years, the rate of diversification accelerated by an order of magnitude, and the diversity of life began to resemble that of today. So basically, just out of nowhere, and this is... I'll get to that. Basically, out of nowhere, there's no intermediates. We just have the appearance of all of these new species of things. So people say, okay, well, they could have just, there could have been a high mutation rate, but they've done the studies that even if you have an abnormal, crazy high, impossible high mutation rate, you still wouldn't get that. You wouldn't get that sort of diversity. You wouldn't get completely different phylums starting. Because no matter how you slice it, Darwin's macroevolution basically hinges on, it's called the tree of life, so it starts with one thing. They can't explain how that one thing got there. They just can't. Which is kind of covered more in the biochemistry section, this last section here. That nobody can explain how that life happened. But assuming that it did, they believe that through a series of mutations, different environmental factors, natural selection, etc., that we get to where we are today. But they can't explain, in the fossil record, this huge jump. They can't explain that if you do the math, given the mutation rate which we've observed and calculated, we come nowhere near where we're at today. It just doesn't
so I'm very interested in this. And what's how mainstream is this? If you were going to ask someone, if I was going to ask a biologist, or not a biologist, if I'm going to ask a anthropologist, or what's the right word?
Cambrian explosion?
Yeah. How about archaeologists?
I think they would know. I believe they would know.
But it's so. You're basically an idiot if you say that. Oh well, we didn't all evolve. It's so
I don't think you're saying that. I'm not. I don't know that you would approach them and say we didn't all evolve. I think you would just say. I was just asking.
You say you're such an idiot if you say that there's serious gaps that evolution can't come close to describing, and when we try to model it, we get just ridiculousness, right? That's essentially what you're saying, that Cambrian explosion comes out of nowhere 542 million years ago, and whenever we try to do models based on ridiculously high rates of mutation, we realize that it's just completely infeasible. I feel like that series of statements is not at all accepted conventionally.
Well, you run into a problem that we're all, without studying on our own, we're all subject to our education.
Yeah.
Right?
I was going to say, even further than that, is like, we're all subject to being, like, these things are all highly technical, so everyone is subject to being specialists. That's the other thing.
True, but I mean, even more basic than that, the educators have a choice. Teach evolution, which is attempting and failing at describing these things, but attempting, or we don't know what happened.
Yeah.
And so,
yeah, and I mean, I think
they basically teach evolution and then say, here are all the problems with it. We still don't really know what happened, but this is kind of all we have to go on.
Right,
Because the only other thing is divine intervention, like something outside of us, some intelligent design.
And I think honestly, Christians and conservatives in general have like not done a good job with being like, oh, you just need to like teach creationism. Like that's never been fair for us to say.
Well, because
you just need to teach the Earth is only 7,000 years old and that the Bible is true. Like that's all you need to teach them. Like it's never been a fair. Like I understand from both public schools and scientists and education. Like they've never had a fair choice. Like because it's either like we're going to teach evolution or we pretty much don't have anything.
Well, the problem has been completely bipolar.
Yeah.
When you're going to teach pure evolution, which is pure Darwinism, which is refuted in all any person that's worth their weight in science after working through any of the data will immediately realize that it's broken. It doesn't account for what it needs to account for. It's not a fully baked thing. It may work on a very small scale, but that's it. The other pole is, no offense, David, but your approach of just taking it
totally wrong.
It was 7 days. No, but I'm just saying, don't ask questions. It was 7 days. We can't explain it, but it was 7 days. Here it was. This is what the Bible says. There it is. It just came to be. That's all you need to know. And I'm in the middle of that. I think that God created physics and created the universe and allowed for these processes to happen and intervene at given intervals, which is very obvious at given intervals. And
so do you think this Cambrian, total speculation obviously, and just a, in my opinion type question, but I mean, do you think that it's possible or probable that the Cambrian explosion itself was like the creation event and then evolution took over from there? Or you're more inclined to be like, it's, single cell and then bacteria and then...
Well, no, because there were single cells before.
I don't know if they know that. I mean, there's no way there's any archaeological record of it.
There is.
Of single cell organisms older than 550 million years old?
Yeah.
Really? Yeah, seems like a good question.
They said...
Because I thought that,
I didn't put the quote in here, but they have,
I mean, something that's small.
Most organisms were simple, composed of individual cells, occasionally in colonies. And they found...
It just sounds like speculation. It just sounds like speculation that you think
They found fossils. I mean, you can find stuff fossilized from prior to that. I mean, think if you find one thing prior to that, that's evidence.
Alright.
But then immediately after that, you have what are those things called? The trilobites, and you have all these other things that just come kind of out of nowhere.
Mineroids.
Yeah. All the stuff you see in the T-Rex cafe.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else on that before I go to the final topic? Good.
Prohibitive amount of information, DNA, did you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, basically, if we're going based on DNA as our information our blueprints, our instructions, in order to get this high level of variation, you would have to have completely, essentially different strands of DNA being introduced to this machinery. Like, there isn't a natural process that can do this. Like, you would have to have viruses that would come and completely chop things up and recreate it, and then not only that, rebuild it into a logical structure. So you can't randomly reorganize, which is what biology does. You can't, there's no systematic organization.
So, minor update here, there's blue-green algae that have left a fossil record that extends far back into the Precambrian. The oldest known are 3.5 billion years old. Cyanobacteria are larger than most bacteria and have a thick cell wall. So yeah, like blue-green algae.
Cool.
Sorry, carry on.
Yeah, so the point was that in order to get the variations, you would need, I mean, DNA is instructions, you know. Random mutations may change your hair color or your eye color. It's not going to make you grow wings, right? Like, a random mutation just doesn't turn on us having scales or something. Like, that's just not how it works. And so, in order to have completely different, like, phylum, like, the top level, you have to have introduction of new material. Like, that's really the only logical explanation. And there's no naturalistic explanation to it, which is why it's not talked about. Because the only way that they can explain it is through intelligent design of some sort. Because it is design. Like, somebody designed the platypus.
Yeah.
I just like the platypus.
Platypus is cool.
Okay, so the final point that really, really drove it home for me, just because I love biochemistry, and this to me was just freaking nail in the coffin. Like, unbelievable evidence that I couldn't believe I hadn't heard of. It's this notion of irreducibly complex systems. So, basically, you need all the parts to perform together in order to accomplish a function. An analogy of that would be, you need all members of a sporting team, a football team, a baseball team, a Sporting KC team, whatever. You need all members in order to operate correctly. That may not be the best example, but...
How about for a soccer team?
Yeah. So, biologically speaking, the two examples that they used was flagellum, which is like sperm, the tail on the sperm, in order to get it to swim. There's...
You just wanted to bring up sperm.
Well, that's the one that everyone would know.
Oh, dude, I know what E. coli is. Come on. Wow.
E.
coli also have a flagellum.
Do they?
Yeah, of course. It's like the go-to example.
Yeah, I guess they do.
I don't know that
Some
much
of us
about.
wouldn't know that.
I don't know that much about flagellum.
The flagellum is that little propeller, basically.
No, I mean I know what it is now that you guys have described it, but I mean I wouldn't know what it was without the description.
Okay.
It's the tail of the sperm.
Yeah.
No, it's the propeller on the E. coli, the subby base.
Sorry.
There's no reason to be crude.
I'd like to apologize on behalf of Doug to our viewers.
Okay, I'll use a different one. The cilia, I believe, on the back of your throat. The little hairs on the back of your throat that massage, your food down and the mucus down.
No, you're just being disgusting.
That was the other example.
Better when we were talking about sperm.
Blood clotting. How about that?
Alright.
Blood clotting, if my memory serves me correctly, they
even mention this in the book. There's 21 factors that are included in blood clotting. It's a cascade of 21 factors in order to get your blood to clot. Period.
Yeah.
It does not work if you are missing any of them.
Yeah.
Like, period.
This also is a really interesting point that the nucleotide bases don't attract each other.
Yeah.
Or don't interact with each other. I never thought of that, but that's so damning.
Yeah.
Like, that's just,
And furthermore, if it was just a naturalistic thing,
that is so damning.
so that's
Hold
jumping.
on, you can't skip.
Okay.
I need to know
We'll
what the
get back to that.
nucleotide base is.
Okay,
So
so
you've got what is it? A, G,
AC,
what are the four?
adenine, cytosine, guanine, and tyrosine.
So basically, like DNA, you can break it. Sorry, this is your forte. I'm just your topic.
Well, let's
No, it's good to hear your
we'll,
voice.
we'll wait until I know. That's,
No offense, Doug.
I welcome it. Let's wait till we get down there. I want to finish this one. So irreducibly complex systems basically means you can't take away one part from another function. So blood clotting, if you take away one of those, it does not clot. Period. We bleed to death always. It doesn't matter. Flagellum, if it's a 3-part system, if you take away one of those things, none of it works. Therefore, in order to have naturalistically come upon these sorts of mechanisms, it would have had to have 3 mutations that were all beneficial that happened simultaneously, which is statistically impossible, basically. All of those things would have had to happen simultaneously. And this is just, it's just everywhere. If you get down to the biochemical level, these sorts of like dependent systems are everywhere. It looks like everything is interdependent upon itself, it seems, and it just looks like someone drew up a plan and then it came to be. And that's what these biochemists basically come to determine, is that that's really it. And so the people who don't become Christians basically just stop thinking about it, and they just don't address. They're like, well, we just don't know yet. So that's kind of that sort of thing.
That's great.
But basically, those are 2 of numerous, countless, irreducibly complex systems. But that's what a lot of this biochemical evolution versus creationism really came back down to. Furthermore, there has yet to be an actual experiment that has, regardless of whether the environment was possible or not, they have not ever been able to create living materials from non-living materials. You can't just dump nucleotides and the stuff to make a cell wall into a test tube and shock it and get it to work. You can't get, like, all
So what
these-
have they gotten? They've gotten proteins?
There was one experiment, the Miller experiment, where they made this primordial goo with a whole bunch of nitrogen and sulfide or something in there, and then they shocked the crap out of it, and they got a nucleotide. Like, one. And in order to make a protein, to make the protein like the cellular wall, you need way more than one. And then in order to make the machinery on the inside, you need at least, what was it? To make tertiary structures, which is protein folding, in order to make it functional, you need like 60 to 70 nucleotide pairs. Or, not nucleotide pairs. Proteins stacked together. And basically, in the environment that they created, it would just be immediately like reacted with on all the stuff that's around it. So it just would have disappeared.
Yeah.
You would like decay right away, basically.
Yeah. Okay, so DNA points to a designer. So the basically the most simplistic explanation of this is that every code has a designer. Binary has a designer. All languages have a designer. Just anything that you can think of that's codified was designed by a higher intelligence. And so DNA is a code. Therefore, it's kind of
causative argument, I guess, but that was one of them. So this is back to what you were saying. So the notion is if if the DNA coding that has created all of us were to happen naturalistically, you would think that it would happen in some sort of a pattern, because it would be based on biochemical reactions. Well, there's no pattern because there's no biochemical reactions within the nucleotide pairs. So, Matt, do you want to explain the nucleotide?
So, yeah, I mean, just basically, DNA has that double helix, and then, so
It separates, right?
The RNA comes, there's something that separates it out and turns it into RNA, which is basically a copy of it.
Right.
But just what's crazy about that is, so you've got the helix, which is the structure, and apparently, according to this, those markers, A, G, C, D, whatever they are, essentially it's the DNA version of code, of binary code. So those markers, they are attracted to the structure, but not to each other. But the information comes from them being attached to each other. So it really matters if it's an A attached to a B, right? Or if it's a C attached to an A. Like, that's what really matters, because when it gets unzipped, and they need to have a copy of each other, right? So it gets unzipped, and then it goes over there, and they read off that, and they're like, okay, fold here, fold there, fold left, fold right. It's like a 3D printer on like a molecular level. It's insane. I never thought about it before, but if those two aren't attracted to each other, they're just attracted to the cell wall, then like, how the hell did they just like all stack up in the right order? Like, that just makes no sense at all, right? Because it would kind of make sense if you're like, okay, well they have to make a copy of it, and so A's are attracted to C's, like these things they're it makes sense in this kind of like magnetism, or like, oh yeah, like I can see how those chunks of code would like naturally form because they interact with each other. But if they don't interact with each other at all, then basically you've got the helix structure and it's just sucking them in at random. It just totally defies, and the fact that it's dual, right? Like, maybe if it was like one pole and it's sticking in at random places, but they have to, like, there has to be two ends of the pole and they come in together in the center. That's just like insane.
Well, those are attracted to each other. So you have the sugar phosphate backbone, which is in the core that's twisting around, and you have a coding strand and a non-coding strand. So your coding strand will have the code, obviously. So your A's, C's, G's, and T's, and then on the non-coding strand, you just have the inverse. So A's and T's, G's and C's.
Yeah.
So those are actually reverse, like, polarity down at the base. So those stick together.
Okay.
But between to the left and to the right, they don't. But furthermore, each one of those, like, it goes in codex. So it goes in 3 base pairs for 1 protein blob. So you have all this machinery. I mean, tons of machinery that's required to split open. So first of all, DNA is, if you stretched it out, is 6 feet long, 1 strand. It's coiled up. It's wrapped around.
And when we say 1 strand of DNA, I mean that basically means like it's enough to carry the information for us or for a monkey or for whatever, right? Yeah. Just in one.
Yeah,
it's
every one of
right.
your cells has your whole blueprint, which is nuts.
Right.
It's all your chromosomes, which is coiled. So chromosomes are the tightly coiled DNA around the topoisomerases.
So chromosomes are the 14 chromosomes are in the DNA, or like
they are
the pattern. Oh, they are the DNA.
Chromosomes are DNA coiled up around these balls, and then they assume this structure that looks like this X. And so when you go to read from the DNA or cell replication, you pull it off of this ball,
and then you uncoil it, you snip it and uncoil it, and then you get to the coating strand, and all this machinery comes on. There's these binding proteins that bind here, so that this won't bind back up to the complementary strand. And then the polymerase sits on it, and then every 3 base pairs matches up with a certain pattern that will then come in and sit on it, and then it's got a certain protein attached to it. The polymerase will grab, sorry, I'm merging the two. Polymerase just turns it into RNA.
And the RNA gets
Then the
shipped
RNA
off.
gets shipped out and then goes into the mitochondria, where the ribosome sits on it with the 3 codex, and then grabs the protein ball and then moves to the next one. And then with each of these, it takes about 60 or 70 in a string, and then based on which bases they put together, then I should know this better. Based on that, they all have different structures and polarities. Mm-hmm. It will fold, and then there's also additional machinery to help it fold. It will fold into its final structure and take the shape as another ribosome or another polymerase or an enzyme to facilitate, like lactate. Mm-hmm. Something like that.
It's amazing how much, I remember studying this. I mean, I was a business major, so I didn't have to take too many classes along these lines, fortunately. But I don't remember, if I took it now, I think what would strike me the most about it is back to the binary thing. Like, I think it would have just really stuck out to me how much it was like code.
Yeah.
It's just interesting.
Well, it blows my mind. I mean, all of it blows my mind, but particularly every one of our cells has got our entire DNA strand in it. So how the heck does a fingernail know to, parse it to get to the fingernail section? That just doesn't even, make any sense, Because obviously I don't have brain cells popping up in my, wherever, and vice versa, but it's and over time,
Yeah.
How the heck does these cells know that? Yeah, I'm a meniscus. So let's not turn it to a red blood cell or whatever. It's
right.
Crazy.
Mm.
Just insane.
Yeah,
and it's got to be crazy
so
accurate
much
too. I mean, they've got to be parsing that to that exact code, or else it wouldn't work, or it wouldn't work with its neighbors, right? Because then once you form something like a meniscus or a bone or whatever, that whole thing has got to act as a structure. So you've got to parse that. You can't just be like, I'm a bone type. You've got to be really freaking exact so that the femur has its right shape and everything else.
Well, so the nice thing is that there's actually a lot more than just the DNA. So this isn't fair to say that just the DNA is happening and causing all of this stuff. So, for instance, you start with one stem cell, which is your fertilized egg.
Yeah.
That then gets triggered through a whole bunch of internal and external processes to then divide, and then it keeps making stem cells until a certain point where it's this ball of stem cells, and then certain ones will start differentiating.
Yeah.
And then, so this one starts shutting off pathways, and it becomes your soft tissue stuff. This one over here will start shutting off pathways, and they'll become these they're called pluripotent cells, where they can no longer be brain cells, they're now bone cells.
So when that happens,
master one.
So when that happens, the whole the
different.
GNA thing is happening inside those stem cells. I guess I need more context. I think.
Yeah. So basically, they stop transcribing certain parts of the DNA. So they stop reading certain parts.
Right. Okay. They're kind of like, we're bone cells, so we're just going to keep replicating as bone cells.
Right.
And but that's still ultimate copy. It's like they still have the data, but they just don't need it, basically.
Yeah. Which is why that's why you can get eyelashes and skin cells from somebody and find out exactly who that person is.
Right.
Because it's their full identity, if you will.
I don't know, man. It's. I mean, I get the point that like, okay, yeah, there's also like external markers, but that's even more mind-boggling, you know?
Yeah. So like,
Because
if you're
it's external only from the perspective of a single cell, you know, but it's internal from the perspective of it's one organism. So it's just there's so many layers to the good machinery. It's insane.
Yeah, and to make matters worse, like if you think of even the most basic single-celled organism, it's still crazy complex.
Yeah.
Like it's still functioning with that level of machinery. It's way less. So like their DNA is not.
Very long.
I said it was tocoisomerase before. It's not. It's histones. The balls are histones. Like bacterium,
Yeah.
they just have a circle. It's just
Yeah.
a circle of DNA. It's really quick to sequence. It's really easy to insert things. It's really easy to cut out. You know.
So bacteria, they like their DNA would be it's the same proteins basically. It's the same same coding combinations. It's the same.
Yeah, same biochemical structures and ACG.
Yeah.
That's why, like, because isn't that a method for modifying our DNAs to use bacteria to, like, splice or whatever? This is really understandable.
Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's where we get a lot of our genetic modification is through bacterium and viral DNA. So you actually use a virus to inject foreign DNA, and then the bacterium absorbs it, and then you can trigger it to incorporate the DNA. So we used to do that. We would introduce, I explained this last time, but in lab we would kind of put this free DNA out there with these genes.
Yeah.
And then the gene would be a fluorescent gene, so it would make the cell fluoresce.
Yeah.
And then it would also have an antibiotic resistance.
Yeah.
And so, but they were inextricably tied.
Yeah.
And so we'd introduce this to the bacterium, and then we'd kind of make it transform. So we would shock it and put it under stress.
Yeah.
And then under certain stresses, it will absorb the contents outside of it
Yeah.
to try and like do whatever and try and survive.
Yeah.
And in certain cases, it will absorb that DNA and incorporate it into its own.
Huh.
And then all you have to do is put it on a plate in fluoresce, and then you can see which ones have the resistance.
Yeah.
Or you can just streak it in a plate that has that antibiotic in it,
Yeah.
and then they'll all be fluorescent, or whatever you want to do with it.
Yeah.
So there's tons of stuff that you can do with it. There's so many layers, it's ridiculous. And the main drive home point is that when you get to that, it can't naturally develop. Like they can't even figure out how to naturally get a cell wall. Period. They have yet to come up with a theory or a hypothesis on how the first cell wall ever developed.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that is what really put the nail in the coffin for me. So yeah, in conclusion, everything in the book, all the scientific evidence seemed to...
Sorry. I apologize.
Good. That's good.
The podcast is better without me.
Yeah. All the evidence just seemed to point back to this creator. There's a quote that I want to find that I really liked. Galileo said it. He said, science tells you how the heavens go, and the Bible tells you how to go to heaven. The beautiful part is that they just kept going back to the Bible, and it held up at all of these findings. The book even went into consciousness and proving consciousness, proving the mind and the soul over just a physical being, which is very interesting. I highly recommend it. But it's kind of beyond the topic from here. But all of these things kind of just go back to, like, there's a creator, and the Bible has been the most undeniable, irrefutable sources of documentation, and that, scientifically speaking, it holds up. I would say that the only thing that could be contested is that 7 days, which, in my opinion, I'm willing to hand wave because I'm not a strict literalist, and so, if that's a word, legalist. So, I believe that those 7 days could be God's days, and each one of those days could be 100 million years or something, and that adds up. So, I think that's it.
Questions?
Devil's advocate-ness?
David? Any thoughts? Can you ask us why it matters?
Yeah, I can. No, I mean, this is all great and fascinating to somebody, but I mean, I didn't. No offense, I didn't go to college. These are most of the stuff that you guys talked about tonight.
This is high school stuff, though.
Okay, well, look what high school I went to.
What high school?
Well, it's not high school,
No.
homeschool stuff.
It's not high school homeschool stuff. This is
Yes, it is.
No.
no,
Really?
it's not. So I have no.
I was homeschooled for a little bit too.
90% of what you were talking about tonight, no clue.
Would you like for me to expand on it?
No.
Wow, this is
Certainly
good.
not. Certainly not.
No, I mean,
I'm glad we did this at your house.
I get it. You know, yes, it is. I think this is fascinating that it all seemingly points back to a creation design. And that is great. I never doubted that, you know. So I agree with everything. Yes, this all makes sense in the fact that, yes, this all goes back towards that it was, you know, a beautiful design and, you know, there was a hierarchy actually doing it.
But you don't care very much because you didn't really care in the first place.
Well, he already
You
believed
didn't really need it.
Yeah,
I believe it.
no, I already believed it. I
Why
mean,
didn't you drink all your root beer? Just as a
it's
side
a
note.
process.
Why didn't you give me a refill?
You shouldn't ask me to.
Do you want to right now?
I will.
Okay.
Do you want me to leave? Is that why you don't?
So I think,
I mean, what do you want? What do you want from me? I'm just curious.
I
Like,
think we just wanted your thoughts.
I agree with everything that you said. I mean, the only thing I don't agree with is I don't necessarily think it, I mean, this is just my argument. I don't think the Earth is 100 million years or a billion years old or whatever. You know, that's my own personal take
Right.
based on what I've read out of the Bible. You know,
The
and-
7 days.
yeah. Well, I mean, like here, even in, you know, Genesis 1:5, you know, God called the light day, and the darkness He called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. So that to me means you have a beginning, which is darkness, and that's night, and it goes into, you know, light, and, you know, evening, morning, it's a day. You know, so is it possible that that day was that amount of time was more than a 24-hour period. I don't know, maybe, but I don't see why.
You gotta at least admit that from a very plain, simple reading of it, it clearly appears to be saying 7 literal days.
Absolutely.
You would never, if you had no idea about all this stuff, you would never ever read that and be like, oh, that's probably 10 million years.
I also wouldn't take it that way. I mean,
What do you mean you wouldn't? What do you mean?
the Bible, while being scientifically sound, is not intending to be a scientific document of the origin of the universe.
True.
And so I would not try and make it do that sort of a thing. I wouldn't make a science book try and teach me about art. It's the same kind of thing. The Bible was written for a reason, and it was to get to know God, not to find out the exact inner workings of our universe.
One thing that helped me a lot, David, is later in Genesis, it talks about how the serpent goes and talks to Eve. Mm-hmm. And I think everyone that reads that's oh, not a literal snake, but the devil, right? Because snakes don't talk. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of a nice thing in the text, where it's well, I know it says a serpent, but that doesn't make any sense. And so that kind of helps me to think that, it's being written with some amount of allegory, some amount of metaphor.
Yeah, but I mean, I
really appreciate that line being in there.
I agree with you, but what about, I think if you read, then the Lord God said to the serpent, because you've done this, you are cursed more than all animals, domestic and wild. You will crawl on your belly, groveling in the dust as long as you live. To me, I guess, and this may be a pushback on everyone to a certain extent, but to me, the entire thing is so obviously a metaphor that I don't necessarily worry about any of that part of it being true. I feel not just the first part of the creation, not just the 7 days, even some of this part of the story, I don't know. The Satan was some sort of a snake that had legs, and then God cursed the snake. And so the snake that the devil had been inheriting his form, the snake then crawled on its belly the rest of... some of that's just I don't know. It can be hard to take literally, I think.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, I agree. That's why I brought that snake part up, because, Paul refers back to, that serpent, the devil, or something like that, kind of continuing on the metaphor,
But why is it difficult to believe that it wasn't an actual snake that spoke to Eve? Because later on in the Bible, it talks about, what was it? I'm trying to remember who it was. He was beating his donkey, and because the donkey wouldn't move, because there was because there was an angel in front of it, and it turned around and it said to him, "Why are you beating me when I'm not willing to move? Because there's something here in front of us."
Yeah, Balaam's donkey.
Yes.
Yeah, but even if it's a literal snake, it's obviously just a vessel for the devil. It's not
True. There's no reason.
There's no reason to think that it's just a snake.
No, I don't think it was just a snake. I do think it was a devil.
So the donkey thing, it is apparently just a donkey. Right?
I think, and maybe we muddy the waters a little bit, because I think the snake thing, I agree with Matt, but let's just go back to the original point. If we go back to just the 7 days, the creation story, I think we have every reason to think that even in their description, if we just go through their description and we for just a moment set aside the day, that this was the first day, this was the second day, this is the third day, this is the fourth day. The rest of the description of the creation, it's pretty hard to contest, actually. The one thing being built upon the other thing is, pretty much true for how you would describe the creation of the universe, even if it took 542 billion years. Layer upon layer, it's pretty much accurate. First the universe exploded, it created light and dark. Then there was, I mean, if you're watching those videos of like the rapid forming of the universe, it's pretty insane. Like watch the Earth be like lava and then like cool and like all that kind of stuff. So my point being that like, if we consider that to the Jews who wrote the creation story, the 7 days and then God resting on the seventh day was extremely important to their religion because of the Sabbath, then to me, the rest of the creation story becomes pretty much spot on, other than just trying to say that it took a week. And like, so for me, I don't have to try to justify, like, I don't even need to do any like fancy, like, oh, you know, a lot of Christians like to bring up to God 1,000 years is a day or something verse. But like, there's no fancy formulas that are needed here, because going back to what Doug said, like, it was never intended to be scientific. It was meant to explain the beginning of the universe in a world where people didn't believe in a single God. Like, they believed in the God of the ocean and the God of the trees and the God of the mountains. And it was in direct opposition to all these other religions that said, no, that's not how the universe came to being. It was through, you know, Zeus, you know, who made love to such and such, and all these other competing viewpoints. And it alone held this monotheistic viewpoint, you know? So, I guess I'm just saying all that to say that I think it establishes what it needs to establish. Mm. And you don't necessarily, for me anyway, and I think you can take it however you want, but like for me, it doesn't have to establish any more than that.
Yeah, it clearly achieves its purpose.
I have a completely different line of thinking.
But I don't think, sorry, I just want to quickly point out, I don't think we've ever really addressed David's point, because he keeps saying, why can't it actually be literal? And we're like, don't worry, it's not that big of a deal that it's not actually literal, you know?
Well, no,
kind of like speaking past his objection.
I respect, and that was why at the very beginning, I conceded that is perfectly within the realm of all of this.
Yeah.
Well, no, but okay, we haven't addressed the objection directly, because I think...
Well, so let me, really quick.
Okay.
I have a direct objection to
I do too, yeah.
And that is, in order for it to be 7 days, creating Earth with it looking like old Earth, etc., that to me is messing with, in a sense, some of the natural laws that God has created. In a sense, bending his own rules, or skirting around some of his own rules, for whatever reason. And we don't see any evidence of that happening, and I don't believe that God has any reason to do that, and I don't see that there's any justification for that to have happened. And so, for me, it just makes more sense that to God, outside of time, if I want to try and reconcile the literal translation of the 7 days, there is nothing saying that God didn't come into time for a day to do work, leave our time, let 1,000,000 years, 100,000,000 years pass, come back into our time, which is then the next 24-hour period for him, and then do the work, leave our time, and then etc., and then come back. There is nothing stopping him. He can jump in and out of time, we know that. He is persistent through our time. He's everywhere.
That's true.
And
so nothing says that it couldn't all be true.
Right. And I don't think that they're necessarily in contention. To me, I just don't see... I don't see any reason that is consistent with how God behaves within the Bible that he would do such a thing as to create an entire Earth with a fossil record and geological records and all of this.
And stars coming from billions of years away sending us light. It's all very...
and all of his mathematics and all of his physics pointing back and being consistent to be able to trace back.
It would be very, like, out of character, at least in the sense that we feel like we can understand the character of God.
Yeah. And maybe it's just a joke. I mean, I concede that point that he can do that. It's within his realm. And so I concede that point. And there's nothing we can do to prove one way or another. It's just a purpose. It's a leap of faith at that point. You just have to put your faith in one thing or the other.
Which is fine. again, my only problem with the fact of an older Earth is, like I said, here in Genesis 1:5, and there was evening and there was morning the first day.
Yep.
Now, at what point in time then, if evening and morning, were longer than they are now, at what point in time did he change the timeline?
Well, he jumps out of time.
One, I understand that. I understand that there's a possibility that he jumps in and out of time. But are we sticking with that as that is what we think happened?
Well, what would you say, though, to this idea that... So you think that the stars and stuff just appear to be older than they actually are?
I think it's possible.
Well, I mean,
Is that what
you're
think?
saying
You have
that's what
to-
you think.
You have to have a
I
theory
think-
of
I
why
think-
this stuff appears to be so old.
True. Okay. My personal belief is that God created an older looking earth. And that everything that he created at that given point in time existed how he wanted it to look. Okay? I see no reason for him to wait 150 million years, to let things settle, to let things evolve over time or whatever.
There would have been no waiting, though. That's the thing.
I understand that. To God, there wouldn't have been any waiting, but why then? I mean.
No, I get it. It sucks because
No, I mean, I
your
get
whole life it's presented to you as such a clear cut. Are you 3 years old? Just read it. It's obviously 7 days, and then so it's really a big leap to just be no, it's not. That was shattering for me.
Well, and I'm not opposed to it. I'm not opposed to my thought process being wrong, but
I think you're representing the viewpoint of 90% of the people I know. So I feel like if I can't reasonably explain to you why I don't agree, then I have very little chance of reasonably explaining it to most of the people who I go to church with. Yeah, I'm just curious how you can reconcile the. I guess as long as you're willing to say, I think God just made everything look old, then there's no problem. You know what I mean?
yeah, and I'm fine with that. I think God created things how He wanted to create it. And I'm not saying that my viewpoint is 100% accurate. You guys are all psychotic and lunatics or whatever. It's.
I don't know.
I could be the psychotic one for believing this, but I see no reason that.
But don't you think it's out of character of God to
what?
make it appear old, even though it's not? Doesn't that strike you as being strange?
Creating deception.
No, creating deception. I don't think God creates deception.
There are dinosaur bones in the ground, fossilized.
Yeah.
But also fossilized bacterium. There's carbon dating, which has been proven to be relatively accurate to within a plus or minus.
Well, fair enough that
millions
they
of
told us it wasn't, but I've studied it since.
Yeah, when textbooks, they always made sure to have that call-out box.
Carbon
By the
dating.
way, anyone tries to tell you that carbon dating tells you that's older.
Yeah.
So in this book, they even go into more finite things about, pollen. Pollen seems like an incredible waste. But because of pollen, we're able to carbon date pollen that's fossilized with other fossils that then put it at a specific time in history, in the fossil record. Just because there's, billions of pollens being released all over the place, now we can use that to say, oh, these were fossilized at the same time, therefore this thing must be this old. There's trees, plants, animals, all this stuff. There's geological methods that all fit computer modeling and science that, that's a deception if it's false.
Also, if you take a core, so if you're the North Pole or South Pole, they melt every summer and then freeze and melt and freeze and melt and freeze. If if you take a core going down like 2 miles and pull up that big long shaft, you can count like how many times it's frozen and unfrozen, and it's, I mean, way more than 10,000 years.
Well, it's not that much more. I think it's only like 30 or 40.
30 or 40,000 years?
30 or 40,000.
Oh, I mean, at that point it's semantics, right? Like,
Well, but also
if you blow it up, because the whole 10,000 years thing is all based off the genealogy stuff.
Right.
So as soon as you blow that
I mean,
off,
the ice course is the original one that did it for me. I was like, well, that one's like, I don't even have to get into the complication of trying to figure out carbon dating, or I don't have to trust the light from the stars thing. Like, 'cause some of those are like, they all make sense to me scientifically, but you're like, a lot of them you read and you're kind of like, I don't know, like, I get why they made the assumptions, but I don't necessarily have any way of knowing whether or not all these assumptions are true, or if it actually means what they're saying it means. But the ice cores one was like, okay, that's like pretty irrefutable.
Right.
But hey, there you go. I mean, that only gives you a 30,000 or 40,000 year old Earth, so just,
but if you look
deal with that one somehow.
tectonic plate shifting,
Yeah, tectonic plate shifting, that's true too.
Pangea.
Yeah, I mean, I think just back to the original point, like, I find it very, I think we've made so many advances, like, in technology and science and medicine, and those advances are all based on the world and science and physics being predictable and consistent. And so that's where I just philosophically can't handle the Earth looking old and not being old,
I just don't see God needing to change the rules for whatever reason to accomplish anything. And so that's why I land on the side of Big Bang, and then he just...
But the problem is like, once you go down that path, it's like...
It's a slippery slope,
slope, and there's other things. There's other things that start to fall with it, and it's like nothing you can do about it. I mean,
oh yeah, it sucks.
Wait, what path?
Well, as soon as you're like, because it's so easy to be like, the Bible's completely literal. Like, that is just an awesome, really hard rock blanket statement to rest in. As soon as you give up that 7 days thing, and it's, for some reason, it always really stung that it's like the first sentences, it's like right off the bat. So that's just like, of course it's illogical, but that was always just like salt in the wound. Like, are you kidding me? Like I'm not even like a chapter in and I'm already throwing stuff overboard, Like, this is not a good sign here,
Yeah, but to me, I'm not throwing it out. I think it was 7 days to him. I just don't know what those 7 days were or would have been to us.
I think Genesis is an allegory. I think it's like, that makes more sense to me, that it's just, I think it's useful to realize inside the Bible is not a book, the Bible is a collection of books. And you've got poetry, you've got historical records, you've got metaphors, you've got love songs, you've got all the above, soup to nuts. And it's really more like we're so spoiled in our world. Yeah, my boss says all the time, I'm sorry. It's completely randomness. He's like 65.
It just meant to be start to finish.
Okay.
But it's like, we forget that, like, we have, like, libraries all over the place, but back then, for most of history, a book that thick is essentially a library,
Yeah.
Especially when it's, so... I think it's just, you just have to have a more nuanced understanding of the Bible, and it's really not that bad, but that initial, like, jump into the pool is like...
Well, I get that, and I agree with you. I know that there are different aspects of writing throughout the Bible, but why do we get to decide what's allegorical and what's factual? How come Genesis 1 can't be as much factual as Matthew 25, where Jesus is getting crucified?
Well, it can be, but then you've got to deal with all the stuff we just said. So you have to say that, okay, so you don't think that the earth is old, so you think that God made it to be old.
Mm-hmm.
And so then you're like, well, then that is commentary and insight into God's nature. So sometimes he makes things like appear to, like, he intentionally wants to throw you for a loop, essentially.
Yeah, see, I don't believe
it's a weird thing to put into God's, like,
it makes him a deceiver.
It makes him a deceiver.
Why does it make him a deceiver? He never...
Because all of the rest, if we follow his rules, his physics, his math, his formulas that he created, all of those point to an old Earth and an old universe. And therefore, if they're not, then that is a deception created by him, who would therefore be labeled as a deceiver.
Why? I mean, I get what you're saying, but like, why couldn't he have started it where he wanted to start it instead of, like, let's say he wanted to start it at, 450 million years looking old.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why couldn't he have just started it there?
He could have, but if he would have started it there, then we wouldn't have light from all these distant stars that have traveled for millions and millions of years to get to us.
Why wouldn't we? If he wanted,
Because it would take millions and millions
just
of
saying,
years.
you're saying he basically called it into existence with those stars that far away, and so
If there was no Big Bang and he just poof, everything is exactly as it is 10,000 years ago, then 100,000 light years or whatever from now, the light from 100,000 light years away would not have reached us yet.
maybe. But what if he took that into consideration and was like, I realize that star is that far away, so this light is going to need to be here.
So he basically created
in
the
order
light.
to see
That's
him.
deception.
Why?
Because putting the fossils into the ground that carbon date to 200 million years ago would be deception if it was not 200 years ago, right?
200 million.
Yeah.
I mean, what if, just to help David out, play on his side for a second, what if God did do that, but it would just have been, like basically there was no way to put us on Earth without pointing to himself so strongly that like he was forced to do this deception, basically.
Like, how is God forced to do stuff like that? That's very strange. But
Well, because
I'm not sure I
he's
understand
bound by... He's not forced to do anything. He was bound only by the desire to present us with a choice. And in order to present us with a choice, he had to sufficiently mask his own presence so that we had a choice.
I'm sure he does a pretty good job of that with the whole problem people thing. You know?
Alright.
Sorry, Dave. I mean, if you want to, if you really want to support, if you want to support David, the better way is to go back to the whole scientific versus personal reason, and where you say that God recognizes that, we need to create the Earth here, the stars here, and we also need to create the light, having already traversed that distance, simply because the night sky is beautiful with stars, and I think it looks cool, and so we're going to do it that way.
Sure. But
You know, that's a much more...
fossils.
So the stars are saying there's no deception because he just wanted it to be pretty.
Exactly. It's like...
And we're just reading data from it. I can buy that. I'll concede that. But
That's a much more kind of like...
I mean, but it's very like, it's a very short-sighted God who would do that. I mean, it's like...
This is why I initially had to... That was my last bastion of like, well... Yeah, sure, it's like scientifically weird, but it is pretty badass. Like, let's be honest, like, big dinosaur bones and stuff, like, that's cool, so...
So maybe there never were dinosaurs? It's like the conspiracy?
Like that sort of stuff, yeah. Then I was just like, this is too much.
With young Earth, there would not be dinosaurs, right?
What? Okay, yes.
I'm asking. I don't understand.
I don't know. I don't know what happened. What happened to them? Where are they now? How did they die out?
Have you watched Ice Age 1 through 3?
I have. Was it a meteor that struck the Earth, and then we were frozen in time or not frozen in time, but the whole Earth was frozen for...
There was an ice age because of the dust and the Earth particulate that got kicked up in the air. They know where they have a site with the crater.
Mm-hmm. And then they all just disappeared at that point in time, and then
they all died and fossilized.
And then life started over again.
There was some existing life. Some of the birds survived. We have them that continue from the fossil record. Some of the sharks, for instance, they survived. Some iguanas, things like that. Lizards survive.
Mm-hmm.
So certain things survive. Bacterium survive.
Komodo dragons.
And then it started all over again. And then
So what
Red
about
Ball.
humans?
Red Ball made it.
Do you think that we came from lizards?
nope, God intervened and created us. To me, he's
It's
just
messy
he's
either
in
way.
there.
He's
He's just in there. He's in there and creating at certain periods of time.
Well, why would he do that? Why would he?
Why would he do anything?
He is
No, I get that. I mean,
he is a creator.
I understand that he's a creator, but why would he create something to destroy it?
Well,
Hey, the
you guys don't
majority-
like my answer, but my answer is that he played with him for a while in the sandbox, didn't like him, so he wiped him out and started all over again. I think that he wanted something more intelligent.
He probably
and
knew
could
that-
truly love him.
he probably
and,
knew
and the
about-
dinosaurs couldn't do that.
He probably foresaw Jurassic Park, and he was like, "These ones are going to eat all of these ones.
This is gonna make
ugly."
this is gonna make Chris Pratt's career.
He's like, I'm going to have to wipe all these things out because these little soft pink guys
But actually,
are never going to
if
survive.
we're talking about the dinosaurs, what about that stuff in Job? Where it's like, have you considered Leviathan? Have you considered this one whose legs are like tree trunks and whose tail is like, a ship or whatever? Have you know those verses?
I really
I do, and yeah, and it is interesting.
He seems really like
maybe
talking
when-
about dinosaurs.
When you do your literal one,
Maybe
we
I'm
can
talking
go
about
through that because
Yeah.
we've pretty much used up all the time now.
Yeah.
But I'll give David the last word.
I don't want the last word.
Oh, okay. Do you have any rebuttal to the?
What does that do to God's character if it is young Earth appearing old?
Do you disagree with him being?
That to
a
me is the
deceiver?
one thing where I just couldn't like.
Why does it have to do something to his character for him to create something?
So let's put it in context of your wife.
Okay.
So let's say that. No. This will be an easier example. You keep saying.
Matt's doing this on his own, David.
No. You keep
Interesting
saying.
move. I might grab another beer.
I gotta go.
You keep saying that, like, why does it make God, by default, why does it make him a deceiver, you know? So let's say that, you come home and there's dinner on the table, or there's dinner in a pan and it's stone cold, right? Then you're like, oh, that's weird. She made dinner and then she left a while ago because this is stone cold. Well, what if she just left a few minutes before, but for whatever reason she put it in the freezer so it would get cold really quick, even though it was just cooked, and then she laid it out back on the stove as if, she had just taken it out without putting it in the freezer first. It's like a whole series of steps to make it look like it had been sitting there for a long time, even though it's just been out of the oven for a few minutes. Wouldn't that, raise some issues with you? Like, why the hell did you do that? It's bizarre.
Yes and no, but I would assume that she had some logical reasoning for doing it. I wouldn't just think my first reaction wouldn't be, she's deceiving me. This woman that you gave me is...
What would you call that? A trick?
No.
A deception?
I would call it, okay, what did you do? Why did you do that? I wouldn't call it a trick. I mean, if she's trying to make me believe that it had been sitting out for a long time or whatever,
But that's the whole crux of the argument. She's trying to make you believe it, right? Like she took steps
To make me
it
believe
appear
that she
it
left
was
it out?
sitting there. Yeah, she took steps to make it, because you're saying that God just makes it appear old. So you're saying that steps have been taken to make it look like it's been that way for a long time, but it's not really been that way for a long time, as per the Bible. So, aren't you kind of like at the you're admitting that it's made to look that way, therefore it's made to appear in a way that is contrary to how it actually is. Like that's like the definition of deception. Do I get kicked
I
out
can't
of
wait to see you get out of this.
Do I get kicked out of the Bible study if David stops being a Christian?
Technically, we'll get kicked out. We'll get kicked out together.
No, I'm not. No, I mean, I have my own beliefs, and I have no problem believing them. Okay, I have no problem believing that the Earth is only 10,000 years old. It doesn't shake my faith. I have no explanation as to why it looks older. It doesn't shake my faith. Do I need to know why it's older? No. Does that help me understand anything about God? It being older than it actually is? No. So, I don't see any reason as to why to doubt it, or, you guys want to talk about it and you guys want to discuss it, great, I'm all for it. But, it's not going to change my opinion, and I haven't done enough research on it to disprove what I actually believe. And I don't necessarily know if I will.
That's fair.
Yeah. Very good.
I'll pray and we'll be done. Dear Father, thank you for this day, for these guys, for this time to join together and discuss you, your character, and your word. Please be with us through the weeks and just be at the center of our focus while we live in your creation. Please bless these guys, bless all the interactions that we have, and in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you for listening to this edition of Godly Talks and Devil's Advocates. Please share your comments and subscribe.